against slavery. Rebels against slavery. Here we go. All black everything. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going live, baby. We're gonna read through, you know, skipping around how we do. But this part is called The Rebel Against Slavery. We're gonna talk about Toussaint Louverture once again. Get a little further understanding about the young king. Here we go. Once again, I do not own the rights to this music, but we rocking it. Uh, Peace and love to all black everything. Everything black. Peace and love you. We're gonna get into it. Here we go. This was the first time that he used the name Louverture in his correspondence. Later, the spelling changed to Louverture, omitting the apostrophe. Hold on. Wait, I think I didn't skip the whole thing. Hold on, my bad. Let's go back. Apologize. Excuse me. Get something to drink here. I apologize, but we go right back into it. Let you know. They go to Toussaint Louverture right there. See, chapter 3, Rebels Against Slavery. Talk about some things that you may not know about. You may not have heard in your history or your school books. You did? So that's what we're here for. Sharing the knowledge. Here it is. The country we know as today as Haiti or Haiti was at one time the French colony of Saint Dominique, located on the island of Hispaniola. It was the place where Christopher Columbus established his first settlement in the New World. After many years of Spanish rule that saw the destruction of the native islanders and the beginning of African slavery, French settlers occupied the western end of the island, and in 1697, it was formally recognized as Saint Dominique. The colony was small, about the size of Maryland, and much of the area consisted of mountains. In the language of the native Taino Indians, Haiti means mountainous land. Within 100 years, Saint Dominique became the richest colony in the Caribbean. By 1791, there were 35,000 white residents in the colony, but there were at least 500,000 slaves, most of whom worked on plantations where sugarcane, cotton, coffee, and indigo were grown. There was another group called mulattoes, or people of color. These were the descendants of European men and African slave women. It was customary for mulattoes to be given their freedom and a parcel of land when they reached age 21. By 1789, their numbers had reached 30,000, and as a separate class, they had grown prosperous. They owned at least a quarter of the land and as many as a third of the slaves. There were few, if any, places where the practice of slavery was as cruel and inhumane as Saint Dominique. Men and women were beaten, branded, maimed, and killed, often in ways that only the most depraved mind could imagine. Many slaves ran away to the mountains where they lived as maroons in isolated spots beyond the reach of a special colonial slave patrol staffed only by mulattoes. This is a little depiction of the Night of the Fire, Saint Dominique, August 22nd, 1791. Look at the rebels. Ain't going for it. Ain't going for it. Got to stop the nonsense, the bullshit. No, can't have it. So we continue. On August 22nd, 1791, after careful and secret planning by slave leaders in a place called Alligator Woods, an enormous slave rebellion started. Slaves on 5 plantations rose up and killed the owners and overseers, setting fire to anything that would burn. Within a matter of hours, the fire spread across the plains, and thousands of other slaves had joined in the uprising. The next morning, there was a gigantic wall of fire and smoke that could be seen from distant islands. Before it was over, 900 plantations, buildings, fields, and crops had been reduced to ashes. Avenging themselves for years, 4 years of abuse, the slaves massacred thousands of whites and mulattoes. Those who could escape to the port cities, Cape Francois, those who could, escape to the port city, Cape Francois. One of the persons whose lives was disrupted by the night of fire was Toussaint Louverture, a slave who had lived all his life at Breda Plantation, about 15 miles from the capital. Excuse me. He was 47 years old, and in comparison to other slaves on the island, he had enjoyed a good and comfortable life. Breda was most unusual in the owners treated the slaves with a degree of compassion and kindness that was known throughout the colony. Born on May 2nd, 1743, which was then the Feast of All Saints, two saints in French, he was named Francois Dominique Toussaint. His father, brought as a slave from Africa, enjoyed special treatment because of his talent and demeanor. He was given his own plot of land and was allowed to marry, something that the slaves were rarely permitted to do in Saint Dominique. As a boy, Toussaint Breda, as he was called then, was sickly and thin as a stick. In fact, those around him at the time had given him a nickname that meant fragile stick. His health improved gradually, and by the time he reached adolescence, he could outdo his friends in endurance and stamina. He was an excellent swimmer, and he had a special fondness for horses. Riding frequently across the fields of the plantation, he was called the Centaur of the Plains. People were amazed at his ability to make horses follow his commands. He enjoyed working in the stables and learned to take care of the horses when they were hurt or sick. One of the most fortunate things that happened to Toussaint was that he was encouraged to learn to read and write, something very much discouraged by the colonial administrators. His teacher was a Roman Catholic priest named Simon Baptiste, who shared his knowledge of plants and herbs with his young pupil. Toussaint was raised from birth as a Roman Catholic from Father Baptiste. He was he received his instruction in religion, which included the knowledge of Latin. The plantation manager and his wife were particularly impressed with the young boy's intelligence. They allowed him to borrow books from the plantation library. He had a special fondness for books about famous people in history. It is said that he enjoyed the story of Spartacus, a slave who led a large rebellion of slaves against Rome. One day, Toussaint himself would be known as the Black Spartacus. As a young adult, Toussaint supervised the household staff at the plantation. He also became the official coachman, taking the manager and others to capitals and other places around the district. The coachman, as a coachman, he obtained a much wider view of the world of Saint Dominique, including the urban life and the capital. In his early eight, in his early 30s, Toussaint married Suzanne Simon, a slave on the plantation who already had a mulatto child. They had two other children. On Sundays, the family attended mass together and worked in the garden on the tract of land that had been given to him. Toussaint was greatly admired by the other slaves on the plantation. He could read and write. He knew the outside world of the whites. As a supervisor, he was kind and fair, and when they were ill, he used his knowledge of medicinal herbs and his skills as a horse doctor to heal their aches and pains. From all appearances, Toussaint Breda respected the whites and blacks and led what he called himself a peaceful and comfortable life. But the fires of August 1791 changed everything. Knowing that it would only be hours for the result swept through Breda, Toussaint first arranged to have his wife and children taken over the border to the neighboring colony of Santo Domingo. He then took the plantation's manager's wife north to Cap Francois. She and her husband soon left for the United States. On his return, he found everything in ashes. Most of the slaves had left. The place where he had lived his whole life no longer existed, and he was now homeless. With everything in ruins, Toussaint decided to make his way to the army of rebel slaves. When he reached them, he discovered that his services were much needed. Appointed physician in chief in the army, he busied himself by healing the sick and wounded rebel slaves. His talent made him valuable for other reasons. One of the very few slaves who could read, Toussaint was also chosen to be a military secretary to Baisu, one of the leaders of the rebellion. Within months, he was put in charge of his own band of men. From his readings of Julius Caesar and other famous military leaders, Toussaint had acquired a basic knowledge about the tactics and strategies of warfare. Using this knowledge and his common sense, he proceeded to put his recruits through a rigorous regimen of training and preparation. Although most lacked proper clothing and shoes, they learned to march in formation, to crawl unnoticed through the woods, to fight, and to shoot. Above all, they learned how to follow orders. That's a little depiction right there. Toussaint King Louverture. Toussaint Louverture. There you go. Father of Haiti. We're gonna keep going almost to this last. We're gonna go down here to this end of the paragraph here. Following Toussaint was not hard. They trusted him and had confidence that he knew what he was doing. He had studied the whites and could anticipate their actions. He could ride a horse better than anyone else, and longer too. He was their doctor, a father image known affectionately as Wise Toussaint, Papa Toussaint, or Old Toussaint. As the French colonial troops and civilians volunteered moved inland to regain control of the colony, the rebel army headed east over the border into Spanish Santo Domingo, where they found refuge and assistance. Spain, which was readying itself for a war with France, found it very convenient to promote disorder. By helping the slaves to fight the French soldiers, it would be easier for the Spanish soldiers to come in and take possession of the colony. The rebel leaders received commissions as officers of the army of the King of Spain. Jean Francois and Baisu, were named generals. Toussaint was now a colonel. While in Santo Domingo, he saw his family and continued to preparing his troops for the day that they would invade Saint Dominique as Spanish soldiers. Before leaving, he wrote a public letter to the slaves. We're gonna come back to that one on the next All Black Everything with the rebels against slavery. Talking about Toussaint Louverture, y'all. All Black Everything, all the time. Peace, love, power, Black power. Yeah. Love y'all, man. Isn't that thing?